So, Plate Plus, in Duke 3D and Iron Fury, you have triggers. So, for example, for a door, you might want to have that it activates remotely. So, let's say we have a load tag 10, and you have a switch that has a load tag 10. This is a very basic scenario of having a switch activated door trigger that you would see in Duke 3D and the other games. So now that we have the door here, it doesn't open with use anymore, but when I press the switch, it will open and it will close with the switch. It's a very basic trigger that you can have in the game, and in our case, we have done a effect that works much like regular touch plates that you have in Duke 3D, but this is a little bit more advanced. I'll show you what the features are there. So, long story short, a lot of the effects in Duke 3D are actually hard-coded. So when you push a button, let's say any of the switches that we haven't created. So when I go to the switches, all these switches are something that we have created for the game itself. So the game hardcode checks, I think it's tile number 260, which used to be the dip switch, and it would kind of like check every time if the button gets pressed, and if it's a pick number 260, and then it's considered a switch, and then it will kind of like trigger a lot of things. But in our case, we had to create new switches and whatnot. So to get the game engine to recognize that we're pressing a switch and then trigger something, then you need something else. So in our case, when we started development, we started first with Touchplate. So the player could walk to something to trigger different things. Ours started actually in the zone 4, where you have the lightning and you have the train, and you have to switch off the lightning that's gonna kill you otherwise if you walk there. That was actually the reason we originally wanted Touchplate Plus, because we needed some way to trigger the new effects. But then it expanded and expanded and expanded, and now it's basically, you could think of it as a touchplate in the game that you can either walk on, or you can even disable the walk-on functionality, so you can have the touchplate, let's say, somewhere outside the map, and a button would trigger the touchplate, and the touchplate itself would magically like open the door or something like that. So it is remote triggerable, and you can also walk on it, and you can different properties, like if you walk on it, you can re-trigger it multiple times, only a single time, or something like that. There's many different options here. So today, I'll just show you the very basic functionality. I'll actually use the height tag 10, and you'll see what happens when we walk on the touch plate. Now, as you saw with the switch, we push the switch and it opens and closes. But the basic functionality of the Touchplate Plus is actually single use. So I walk here, the door is going to open, but if I walk here again, it's not going to close. This is different to what most might expect from the Touchplate, but the touchplates are actually single use in Iron Fury. If I go here and I change the palette to 9, which is the red palette you see here, then the Touchplate Plus becomes multi-use. I'll show you what happens here. So I walk to the Touchplate, the door opens, I walk away from it, nothing happens, but I walk here and I can just keep going here and it will open and close. Like, you can see that it gets triggered multiple times when I step in and out of the sector. So that makes it multiple use. And this is, in many cases, you might want to have it on a door, you might want to have it on a trigger or something, but there's multiple different functions of the touch plate. So that's the very, very basic of the touch plate. I'm gonna go into the other features in a moment, but you can, for example, have that this dip switch, I'll change it to 11, and this dip switch actually touches the Touchplate Plus. You set up the owner with Alt W for owner in 2D mode, and here I put the owner as 11. And what happens actually is that the dip switch will instead do the touch plate, and the touch plate will do the door. So this is basically doing it as a proxy. So the door listens for channel 10, but the switch only does channel 11. But since it goes to the Touchplate Plus, it is acting as a proxy. So the Touchplate Plus can actually listen to channels as well. So again, if I walk here, it will still do that. And if I do this, it will keep doing that. So if you look at the stock maps in the game, you might very well notice that there's, let's say, a tiny sector here. You might find like a single Touchplate Plus there. That usually happens because we're actually using a switch or using something else to trigger the Touchplate Plus, and we don't want the player to walk on the trigger and do some stupid stuff. If you look on the, then we got a little bit wiser, like very near the end of the game development, like after tens and tens of Touchplate Pluses that we have done, we actually started adding flags, like where the Touchplate Plus itself will no longer get deleted, triggered by the player walking on it. So you can literally have the Touchplate Plus here, and when the player walks on it, nothing happens. But when you push the switch, something happens, because right now it has two triggers. It has the switch right here, and it has the walk on when we walk here. You can actually disable the walk on. So it's basically a Touchplate without, well, Touchplate. It's xvel plus, I guess. So it basically acts as a trigger relay. So I'll go over the other functions, what you can do with the Touchplate Plus. This is actually where the most of the really, really cool functionality comes from. So I will do a door here. I will just clone this area and I'll do another door here. So you'll get to see what the other functionality that you can do with the Touchplate Plus is going to be. So this here, and I'll add a second door here. Was 536 width of this. So I'm just going to add a second door here that is identical to the first one. Let's extend this one so we have a little bit of room back. And there we go. And I'm going to change this to 11. I'm going to remove the switch for clarity. Actually, I think I already removed the switch. So what happens here is that the 10 is going to trigger that one. But what is the crazy nice thing you can do with Touchplate Plus is that if I add a load tag 1 here, it will actually do both of these. So we'll do 10 and 11. And I'll just show you what happens here. So basically what happens is the 1 over here, number of additional tags to activate, it gets added to the 10. So the range becomes effectively 10 to 11. And if I change this to, let's say, 5, then it is 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So it becomes 10 to 10 plus 5. So this way you can have, let's say, if I had an activator, I'm just going to clone this. If I change this one to load tag 15, we don't have a door here, but just for demonstration purposes. Now if I press shift, you can see that it actually affects all the 3 of these. You won't get the line every time on some of the effects. It really depends on how much we have actually done these, because all these lines are something we had to manually do for Iron Fury, and sometimes they just don't work. So I'm just going to demonstrate what happens when I step on the switch. Here we go. I step on the switch, and you can see that both of the doors open. And sometimes you get a bit of silly results, because what's happening right now, it's basically looping the touch plate. And this is something you need to kind of manually control, because right now we have so many instances of the touch plate being triggered. I'll just slow down, and there's also another quirk you need to take into account. There are 30 ticks in a second. So imagine everything runs on 30 Hz, 30 FPS rate. So for the code that we do, it actually, despite just doing 10 and 11, there's actually a very tiny bit of delay between the triggers here. So if I step on the touch plate, you will see that the other door is slightly faster than the other one. This is because it is actually 33 milliseconds, which is exactly what you get when you have like 16.6 in 60 FPS, and 33 milliseconds is what you get 30 FPS per like a frame. So here we have slowed down, but of course the engine interpolates this to like 120 FPS that I have right now. In the recording you're going to see 60, but you will see that there is a tiny delay. So always keep this in mind, that there's going to be a 1 tick of delay between each additional thing. So if you want to trigger something simultaneously, you might want to be aware of this. One way of doing this is that a single Touchplate Plus, for example, spreads into multiple Touchplate Pluses, and they get triggered at the same time if you need something to trigger the exact same frame. I'm going to show the delay. So Control M is going to adjust the extra. If I put here 30, then this means that there's going to be 30 ticks of additional delay between each trigger. So if I go to the touch plate again, you will see that there is a 1 second of delay roughly between each of these triggers. So now, right now, the Touchplate Plus is kind of, because it's multiple trigger, kind of works in a little bit silly fashion. It is kind of dangerous to have these as a multiple trigger, because it might activate multiple times and buffer the activation. Like we might have tens of activations right now buffered with the door, but you get the idea. And because the Touchplate Plus is all the way up to 15, it means that there is actually like 4 to 5 seconds before it goes to the next loop. So here, this is what we want. And then the Touchplate Plus also has a feature. So if I put this door open, it's gonna open this door. And let's say I'm gonna remove this, and I'm gonna remove the delay, and I'm gonna make this single use just to show my point here. So I'm gonna put this single Touchplate Plus here, and we want the trigger to be 11. What's gonna happen here is that when this door closes, we'll perhaps have these a little bit more visible. When this door closes, what happens is that the Touchplate Plus will essentially be squished. Right now it's slightly in the midair, but what happens is the Touchplate Plus becomes squished. Set for trigger 10. Because now I have the activator here. Let me remove that. When you have an activator in the door, it actually forces the door to be remote triggered, so it refuses to listen to player interaction. So here, same scenario, I'll close the door, and you can see that it actually triggers the Touchplate Plus. So the Touchplate Plus also has a capability of being triggered when it's being squashed by a door. So in this case, what you could do is that you can have a door open, and then you can have, for example, have like if the let's say the player steps here, then the door gets closed, and then something happens. So this is basically like a way of triggering the touch plate. Actually, before we added this owner, this was the only way to trigger the touch plates remotely. So we actually had to have like a door here, and we would remotely trigger the door, which in turn would squash the touch plate. So we could do it. Like, it seems very, very stupid in hindsight, because we can just have the owner, which is the listen channel. So whenever like owner gets triggered, and of course like we actually had the thing trigger multiple times because owner was 11, so it was effectively triggering itself because we were crawling through it. So let's put the owner as 100, so we're not going to overlap here. But the idea is that it effectively does listen to squishing, and you can also have it so that the touch plate doesn't actually do anything until it gets unsquished. So I'll have the touch plate here, and let's do something a little bit nicer. So I'm just gonna, let's say 6, and there's an enemy, and I have the enemy here. I'm gonna convert it to a respawn sprite. So in this case, you might want to have something like you open the door and the enemy behind you spawns. So let's give this a linking tag for activation. It's going to be 11. So whenever this Touchplate Plus, I'm gonna do a. It will do, let's see, if placed in a door and the door state triggers, don't do anything. So I'm just gonna quickly show like the things you can do with the. So now the door, nothing happens here. But if I open the door, it will immediately spawn the enemy. Because this way you can have the door be closed and have the Touchplate Plus trigger. So you can see that it's triggered multiple times now, and it's also triggering the door every time something happens, basically. So you can do silly things with it, but we're just gonna stop it there. This one doesn't require the red, because the red thing is only for like remote triggers and other things, so don't worry too much about it. Because the door is considered that you can do whatever. You can add, if you flip this, let's see, it was, I think single use was something error. Yes, it's fully transparent. So if you change this, then it becomes for single use. You will see it like on the respawn sprite, it says for single use now. So if you put it like second level transparency, this way you can make sure that it only spawns a single time. And this is a very good way, by the way, to mess up your kill counts if you are not careful. You can also do if you turn it upside down. The additional use is one additional enemy count, so that makes it a little bit easier. There is also an option to spawn sleep when you press F like this, so experiment with what you need, and this way you can get. And also, let's return back to the previous scenario. So we have 10 and 11 here. So I can put this as 10, and we're just going to revert this back to the thing. And if I, as you remember last time, this door opened first. So this would open first. And after that, this would open. So we basically want them to reverse. So you can do 11 and 10. So trigger low tag multi-activation sequence counting backwards from high tag. So in this case, we're going to set this to 11 and low tag is 1. So in this case, the range is from 11 to 10. If we put this to, let's say, 10, then it's going to go all the way to the first high tag. So in this case, it's going to trigger 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and there we go. So low tag is going to be 1. I'm going to do the xvel 1, and this is just to show how the backwards activation works. Now I left it at 11, but you will get the point. It doesn't matter really. So you will see that let me just put the map. You will see very faintly, because I don't have the delay now, but you'll see that the left one opens first before the right one. So that is the counting backwards flag there. And I'm just gonna remove the stuff from there to make it a little bit easier to kind of see. Let's see, yeah, because I don't have the grid. So there is a multi-activation loop activation cycle. So because I had the owner previously, it was basically activating itself multiple times. But this way, if you want to use loop activation cycle, you can basically make like a locomotive that never stops. So you can have it loop over itself. Let's see, say it's a pulsing light, or it's anything that gets activated, or any kind of like, let's say, sequence where you have like a number of pistons animating at the same time, then you can kind of create a locomotion out of it. xvel 4 we already did. That is, if placed in a door, then it doesn't trigger until the door state changes. It's very useful for creating like counters and whatnot. And then 8 is going to be that even if the player steps on here, it's not going to do anything. You have to actually use the button to trigger the thing. And this helps that you don't have to do these silly sectors and put the Touchplate plus there and make sure that the player doesn't, like, you don't need to do that anymore. Just use xvel 8 if you want to use Touchplate for sequencing, then that is perfect. And then this is a little bit strange. Like, this is something I kind of always get a little bit wrong, no matter how many times I do. Oh yeah, here's the original Duke button. So 162, not 62 or whatever I tried to do. So let's see. Here are the buttons. I'm just gonna do an example here. So what this basically does is that I can enable and disable the Touchplate plus. So I'm gonna give this a palette 9, make it multi-use to make it a little bit easier to work with. I'm gonna give this a low tag. I'm gonna give it let's say 400, and here we do yvel override. So I have a channel that is called the yvel. You always need to combine it with it's cripple, uncripple, whatever you want to call it. It basically means that it's going to disable it and re-enable it. So if you trigger this channel, the Touchplate plus will be disabled. So you can, for example, have that the player needs to go all the way to the end of the corridor, and then have a thing here that seeks, okay, the player is here. Then you can enable that when the player returns, the Touchplate plus is actually going to trigger, and before that, it's not going to do anything. So here we have going to do 16. And then we're going to have the yvel is going to be 400. So here we can see how it's going to work. So if I walk here, nothing is going to happen. But if I press the switch and walk here, you can see that it's now working. The Touchplate Plus is working. And if I do this, it's going to stop working. So this way you can kind of create a requirement. You can have the, for example, if you have a light trigger, if you have like a sound or something, you can just like have it disabled when the player goes away. So this way you can enable and disable sequences based on like if it's active or not. And in turn, if I do the yvel, if I put it negative 400, then in this case, it basically will be enabled from the start. So what happens here is exactly what you'd expect. So here, I walk here, is enabled. If I press this, now it's disabled. So this way you can toggle it. But then we have a flag, which is a 32. So if you combine 16 plus 32, which in this case is going to be 48. So 48 here. And what happens now is that this is going to be single use. So as you might expect, I walk here, it works. I press the switch, and now it stopped working. If I press the switch again, you can see that it still does nothing. So this is basically, it doesn't matter how many times I push the switch, it has been permanently basically disabled. So this way you can easily permanently enable or disable if the player, for example, has like restore power and the power has been restored, then you want to make sure that the power doesn't get like unrestored when the player presses the switch again, so you can make it single use that way and have the doors always work. So that's kind of a way to go around that fact. I'm just going to take these away now, and I'm going to take the xvel away. So we start from the regular flags again. And so I will do a little bit of a change here. I will have a second set of these, and I will clone this here. And I see it like this, and yep. Let's make this one green, so it's a little bit easier to kind of identify what's going on here. Let's shade it a little bit brighter so it's easier to see. And now we have two identical sets of Touchplate Plus. And in many cases, you might, for example, require a trigger to be at two different spots at the same time. But you might, for example, only want it to trigger once. So let's say if I have this is going to be like without a pallet, and then this is without a pallet, and let's say I have a corridor here, and let's pretend that these walls are like very close that you cannot, let's like this, so it's a little bit, you normally don't want to do this kind of geometry. Let's pretend that the player has to walk through like this middle bit here, and you have multiple different sectors, different heights and different lighting, and then you have the Touchplate Plus, and you want the door to trigger only for a single time. Then you can have the zvel, which is here we can put like, let's say we can use the 400 again because we no longer use it, and 400 and 400. So this way we can actually put them in a group. So if the player walks over any of these three, then it will basically destroy them. So here, I walk here, it's going to open it, but nothing is going to close it. But if I walk here, it does the same. If I walk here, it does the same. But if I walk around here, nothing's going to happen anymore. And this way, basically, you can just create like if you have a multiple lit sector, or like split into multiple parts, or you have like a looking out of a balcony and you have like multiple sectors under there, or like different ways you can enter a room. For example, if I have like this room looping back here and I enter this room from this side or this side, I might want to make an enemy ambush happen. Or also what's really useful is that what we used in the game. So if, for example, we have this corridor here, And this is just to give an idea of what you can do with this. So we have this corridor here, and it lets you go back here. But what if the player, for example, arrives from, let's say, here, and player arrives from here and wants to get out of this. I'll just mark this a little bit so it's a little bit easier to spot. So let's say we have a this palette here. So the player arrives from, if the player steps here, we might want to spawn enemies like, let's say, facing this way. And if the player like steps through, let's say, here, like over this line, then we can have the enemies like spawn facing downwards this way. So this way you can add enemies like, let's say, um, you can have, for example, this guy facing this way, and you can have this guy facing this way. And these can be respawn sprites. And depending on which way the player comes, let's say the player comes here, I put this here, or the player comes from here, then you can decide which one to spawn. So, for example, if I give this one a 10 and this one 11, then let's pretend we have like very no tags here. That's 11 and this one is 10, for example. But then you want to make sure that the other one gets deleted. So when the player backtracks and goes here, you don't want the other one to spawn, because you want to give the illusion that it's actually the same enemy but has some additional logic. So it's either going to be facing this way and come that way, or come this way without the player seeing. So when the player comes through here, he's not going to see the enemy spawn, but the enemy is already going to kind of start running towards here. So this way you can have like two separate enemies, but to the player it looks like the same enemy. In terms of combat, it just adds a little bit more dynamics, and we use this a couple of times in the main game, so this is a way of doing it. And now you make sure that these two get deleted every time the one of these gets done. So 400 and 400, and boom, you now have one enemy that spawns from the player perspective. But in the editor, you can like create a more dynamic scenario. I think we use this in the like train map, like the when you crash with the train and there's like the green room and whatnot. So like we do a little bit of combat stuff there to kind of make it a little bit more exciting. So we try to kind of like add a little bit of flair there with those kind of things. So definitely use that as a tool. Find it useful. And I'll just remove the, and by the way, select all these sprites and then you can just set it to 0 at the same time. And what the other options are, I'm just going to go quickly through them, is you can ignore the Z velocity setting. So in this case, the from multi-activate triggers, yeah. So 64, for some reason it seemed worked last time. Even we did it, just ignore it. ZL setting on the current sprite. Other sprites can still delete this one. So this means that the exact same scenario that we just had there, but you can optionally set that one of the sprites, if you walk to this sprite, for example, it doesn't delete the other ones. So this way you can make like a, if the player backtracks, there's going to be something, but if the player backtracks here the first time, then this one will be deleted, for example. So this way you can have them still connected, but one of the TP plus sprites will not delete them. So this way you can like layer the combat a little bit, but you have to make sure that the things are still intact. So it could be like a door trigger or something like that, and all of a sudden, if you approach from the other side, it's no longer needed. So, but if you approach from the other side, then maybe you want to keep it. I don't know. Depends on what you might need. So then you have the yvel 0 activation of owner will not be queued, and this means that if there is a situation where we have the button here and you can disable the Touchplate plus. In some cases, some of the events will be sort of queued to the Touchplate plus. So when you press the switch to activate the Touchplate plus again, it will actually immediately trigger the door instead of waiting for the player to walk here. So in that case, you can disable the buffering. In some cases, the buffering works. In many cases, it doesn't. But that's kind of the thing that can happen. So be careful there if you want it not to buffer. And then there is I would say one thing you might want to use is that you can create complicated sequences. So in this case, I will just use this to visualize a little bit of the like Touchplate Plus. So let's say you have a Touchplate Plus and you decide to give it a low tag, high tag, or something. Let's say these represent like the um, 30 ticks that you have there. So you have, let's say, 30 ticks there, and you have like 30 ticks here, and or doesn't really have to be 30 ticks, but let's say 30 ticks. So every second, it basically toggles one channel, and when you trigger like let's say high tech 10, it triggers high tech 10. Then after 1 second, it will be high tech 11, high tech 12, high tech 13, and so on. So this is a very common way of us creating the sequences, and I basically have these visualized in some of the maps even. So imagine that each one of these lines is basically a single tag increment. So that's one tag, this is another tag, this is another tag, this is another tag, and this is another tag. So in this case, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 seconds worth of timeline. So this would basically be here. And let's do this and 30. So what's going to happen here is that it's going to start from 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So that is 7 tags in total, and that means that it's going to be 7 seconds. But what happens if I have like a sequence? I want to do a complicated sequence, and it needs to last for a long time. And let's say there's like a couple of key points where I need to trigger something. And what I do is that I typically do like, let's say I give myself 9 seconds worth of time. So in this case, we have 7 here. So we just add a couple more here just to visualize a little bit better. So I decide, okay, at second 2, I want an explosion to happen. So you can have an explosion here. And all you need to do is that you take this one, and this is just to visualize. You don't need to like have these. I will show a little bit later like how it goes. Let's say I have the explosion start at high tech 40, and let's say 3, and I need like 10 ticks in between, so it's going to be like din 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 trigger. It's going to happen at the 3rd second. So what I need to do here is that I'm going to put the owner, and as the owner, I will put 12. So this means that it's actually going to be triggered when the Touchplate Plus reaches this point. This will trigger. I'll just remove the other ones to make it a little bit easier to visualize. There we go. So this is going to get triggered now. 1, 2, and then this triggers. And this can act completely independently from this timeline. So once the explosion goes, it goes off really quickly. And since it's within the 1 second period that we have here, we have already kind of like done multiple different tags. So let's just visualize it here a little bit easier as well. So we have one thing happening there, and this is just purely for visualization. I'm just like, I want to emphasize. So here and here, you have like this sequence happening within this time period here. Smaller, but you get the idea. So this happens here in the tiny time frame. So you can have the explosion happening. Then you can decide, okay, I need to start like a building collapse. You can, for example, have the building collapse start from, let's say, on the 2nd tick of the explosion. Then you can basically start another timeline, or you can have the building explosion, for example. Let's visualize that it's going to start here. So the owner is going to be like one. So if this one is going to be 12, then the 13, 14. So let's do here. That one is 14. Building collapse, let's say high tech 80. We're going to need, let's say, 4 additional tags, and it's going to be a really long process for the building to collapse. So it's going to be like 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. It's going to be 9 seconds, and it's going to be 12 seconds to do the building collapse. So in this case, we have let's do 2 additional tags there just to make it a little bit easier to visualize. Um, each one of these tags is going to be much longer than what we have there. So we're just going to put this here. And since it's that long, we're just going to visualize it like this and have the thing there as usual. So this is going to be our building collapse that we have planned. And it's going to be there, but it's going to be much longer. It's going to be here, and it's going to be here. So now we have the whole idea of 80, 81, 82, and that way you can kind of visualize. You have this master timeline, which is for the whole sequence where something happens. Let's say a rocket starts shooting, explosion happens, building starts to collapse, and in the building collapse you can have, like, let's say after 3 seconds something happens here. After 3 seconds you get like a bunch of smoke on the ground and some sounds and whatnot. So you can have independent timelines basically constructed out of a single like sequence, because these touch plates can always refer to each other. And you can, for example, have the explosion instead. If I put 43 here, then what happens is that this one is actually going to refer to it. So it's actually going to be after the explosion timeline is done, the 10 tick things, then it's actually going to start this one. So to be kind of like more true to what happens here, this is basically what happens. So it's kind of like I try to visualize this as kind of like a video editor timeline to make it a little bit easier to understand what's going on here. But once you have in the production map, then all you basically need is just to have the Touchplate Plus in a single area somewhere where it's a little bit more legible, and kind of work your way from there. So let me just, I'll just quickly open a map. So let's see if I go to maps and I go to Arena 1. I will kind of show what's going on here. So this is Arena 1. And I think we ended up mirroring this. Let me just do like a Y flip here so it's a little bit easier to see kind of. So what happens here is that you have like the waves here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, blah, 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 blah. So you have 15 waves in the Queen of the Hill mode. And what happens here is that I have a round start, and when the round starts, the starting load tag is basically going to be here. So each round is going to start. There is 1005 is the starting tag. There's going to be 90 additional tags, and there's 40 ticks in between. So in other words, you have a little bit over, it's like 1.2 seconds, 1.3 seconds, and every 1.3 seconds multiplied by 90, something happens, starting from 1005. So this owner is 1010, then this one is 1007, and this is 1005. So immediately you get like the first thing, then the second thing happens, and then the third thing happens. And once that is over, it's going to basically, all it does when you get ready and you get the countdown and go, all it basically does is it starts this Touchplate Plus, and this Touchplate Plus basically starts this sequence starting from the top, and I kind of visualize what the distance is between the waves and so on. But everything you see in the Queen of the Hill mode has been done using touch plates, and this kind of visualizes, like you can see here, that there's like a lot of spawns happening like really in a really quick succession there. I think this one is like the spider round, so you get a lot of spiders there and whatnot, and a little bit of visualizing there. And this is basically me calculating how to do things. And here are the spawns. These are basically going to control like which enemy spawns appear. So this is just like a chain of different things. So these round starts link to the things here, and these things in turn link to the enemy spawns, and these enemy spawns in turn are linked to the points that you see in the map. On my editor crashed, by the way, but that is literally how it works for the Touchplate. So I'll stop it here and experiment with the Touchplate Plus and have fun.